It was late 2015 in San Antonio, Texas, when police officer Hunter Westbrook, a campus patrolman at the University of San Antonio, began to notice a troubling trend. Overdose rates in his precinct were on the rise, and not just a slight uptick, it had become an epidemic. Almost daily, a student would end up in the hospital, and it wasn't because of marijuana, the go-to drug for most students. No, something far more dangerous was at play. Pills, Xanax, Adderall, and oxycodone were circulating, and students were having adverse reactions. Westbrook was no expert on the drug trade, but he knew enough to suspect that these overdoses weren't just from overuse. Something more sinister lurked beneath the surface. The perfect storm. The toxicology reports coming from the hospitals painted a grim picture. The overdoses were the result of counterfeit pills that had been laced with fentanyl, an opioid 100 times more potent than morphine, and methamphetamine, a powerful stimulant. It became evident that students had no idea what they were actually ingesting, and many of them paid for it with their lives. Westbrook's informal investigation was starting to expose the tip of a much larger operation. He partnered with Janelle Navarez, a narcotics officer working with the DEA, and together they began to unearth the full scope of Alaa Allawi's network. Allawi wasn't just supplying pills to students at the University of Texas, he was flooding the campus with counterfeit drugs, sparking a wave of overdoses. The duo soon realized they weren't just dealing with a local issue, it was a sprawling enterprise. From Baghdad to San Antonio, Allawi's early life. To understand how Alaa Allawi transformed into one of the most notorious Darknet drug lords, we have to look at his beginnings. Born in the suburbs of Baghdad, Iraq, Allawi grew up in a country devastated by war. He was just 13 when the US invaded Iraq in 2003, a period that reshaped his life and ambitions. By the time he was 18, Allawi had begun working as a translator for the US Army. It was a dangerous job. Locals who worked with Americans were seen as traitors by insurgent groups. But the pay was good, and Allawi was ambitious. His English was excellent, and he had learned to navigate the complexities of both cultures, Western and Middle Eastern. However, the job also brought with it a moral burden. Allawi witnessed American soldiers treating Iraqi civilians harshly, and he often felt caught between two worlds, struggling with feelings of betrayal and patriotism. Despite the challenges, Allawi adapted quickly. His exposure to American culture through his work led him to an increasing fascination with Western life. He consumed Hollywood movies, embraced hip-hop, and became well-versed in American social norms, developing a cultural fluency that would later serve him well. His ambitions extended beyond the role of a translator. He taught himself programming, developed hacking skills, and began to dream of a life far beyond the limits of war-torn Iraq. A new start in the US, from translator to dealer. In 2012, Allawi's dreams brought him to the United States. With the encouragement of a Texan friend, Eric Goss, Allawi moved to San Antonio, where he initially planned to pursue a career in medicine. He enrolled in paramedic training and took out a student loan to finance his studies. However, life in America wasn't as easy as he'd imagined. The financial pressures began to mount, and Allawi soon realized that the small stipend and part-time work he had were not enough to sustain his ambitions. Desperate to make ends meet, Allawi started selling marijuana at college parties. It was a small-time hustle at first, but it quickly snowballed into something much larger. His natural entrepreneurial instincts kicked in, and he began to explore the more lucrative world of harder drugs. By 2015, he was no longer just selling weed. He was dealing crack cocaine and prescription pills. However, his growing success in the drug world came with increased scrutiny. In early 2015, Allawi was arrested after police found cocaine and Xanax in his car. Despite facing serious charges, he managed to escape with a relatively light sentence of community service. This brush with the law, however, did little to deter him. Instead, it pushed him deeper into the shadows of the drug trade, where he discovered the power of the Darknet. A colleague introduced him to Alphabay, one of the most infamous dark web marketplaces at the time. It was a revelation for Allawi. Using cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, he realized he could sell drugs with complete anonymity and avoid the prying eyes of law enforcement. And so, Dopeboy 210 was born, Allawi's new alias on the dark web, the dark web kingpin, building an empire. In May 2015, Allawi set up his Alphabay account under the alias Dopeboy 210. It didn't take long for him to capitalize on this hidden marketplace. He purchased a pill press online, and soon he was manufacturing his own counterfeit Xanax, Adderall, and oxycodone, lacing them with fentanyl to maximize his profit margins. Fentanyl was cheap, potent, and deadly. Just a small amount could produce the high that customers craved, but it was also incredibly easy to overdose on. Allawi's Darknet business exploded. His store became one of the most popular on Alphabay, offering over 80 different products to customers all across the United States. His top seller was a pack of 50 Xanax pills, branded as X50, which earned rave reviews from buyers. What they didn't know was that the pills were laced with fentanyl, making each purchase a gamble with life and death. Allawi's operation grew rapidly, and by 2017 he was making millions in Bitcoin, shipping counterfeit pills to 38 states across the country. But with that success came a mounting death toll. People who thought they were taking prescription medications were overdosing on fentanyl. One of the many victims was a young man named Vincent Jodal, who overdosed after snorting one of Allawi's pills. Although he survived, thanks to his mother's quick action and the administration of Narcan, many others weren't as fortunate. The DEA closes in, a deadly game. As the overdose deaths continued to rise, the DEA began to take notice. Allawi's drug empire, once operating in the shadows, was now drawing national attention. By early 2017, DEA agents had started to track his every move. They placed GPS devices on his cars, tapped his associates' phones, and intercepted packages he was sending across the country. They knew they were close to taking him down, but they needed hard evidence. Westbrook, who had been working on the case for months, received authorization to conduct the DEA's first undercover purchase on the dark web. In March 2017, he logged onto Alphabay, posing as a buyer, and ordered 500 counterfeit Xanax pills and 30 grams of cocaine from Dopeboy 210. The purchase confirmed their suspicions. Allawi was the man behind the lethal pills that were killing people across the US, the beginning of the end, a sting operation. By May 2017, the DEA was ready to strike. In a series of coordinated raids across Texas, they arrested Allawi's key associates and dismantled his pill production facilities. At one safe house, agents found enough fentanyl and counterfeit pills to kill thousands of people. The evidence was overwhelming. Allawi, however, was not caught in the initial sweep. Realizing his empire was crumbling, he fled to Los Angeles, where he had an apartment. For weeks, he remained on the run, but the pressure was mounting. He began to consider escaping to Mexico or even returning to Iraq, where his family had used his illicit profits to open a shopping center. However, before he could make his next move, the DEA caught up with him. In June 2017, Alaa Allawi was arrested in a luxury home in Houston. When agents stormed the house, they found Allawi surrounded by weapons, disposable phones, and Bitcoin wallets. It was the end of the road for the Darknet kingpin. The legacy of fentanyl, an epidemic that endures. In court, Allawi pleaded guilty to a host of charges, including conspiracy to distribute fentanyl and other drugs. He was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, with the promise of deportation to Iraq upon release. His associates, including Benjamin Uno and Trevor Robinson, were also sentenced, receiving prison terms ranging from 18 months to 10 years. But while Allawi's reign had come to an end, the damage he had done could not be undone. Fentanyl, the drug that had made him a fortune, continued to wreak havoc across the US. By 2021, overdose deaths from fentanyl had skyrocketed to over 106,000, making it the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45. Despite law enforcement's best efforts, the demand for illicit drugs had not diminished. In fact, it had only grown. The rise and fall of Alaa Allawi is a story of ambition, greed, and the dark side of the internet. From his humble beginnings in Baghdad to his reign as a darknet drug lord, Allawi's life was a whirlwind of opportunity and destruction. While his empire may have crumbled, the legacy of fentanyl, a drug that has claimed thousands of lives, continues to haunt the United States.